Our last grouping is going to be led by moderator, CEO of SolarBlock, Eric Planey, who is a solar tech and construction tech CEO and has quite a bit of experience in global banking and finance.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I think this is a great conversation we've had thus far. I love the fact that we've went from policy to real tangible example of the pitfalls it takes to actually bring sustainability to the people, to the companies. And I think it's a perfect segue into this panel discussion because I'm going to introduce our great guest speakers, our great panelists, and we're going to talk a little bit about taking all of what we heard and creating a strategy from it that's going to benefit Pittsfield and the Berkshires. So I'm going to ask everyone, and I'll go at the end. I'll start with Michael Coakley, who probably everybody knows, but I'll ask Michael to start first, and we'll work our way down.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Coakley. I'm the Business Development Manager for the City of Pittsfield. I'm also the Interim Executive Director of PETA, the Pittsfield Economic Development Authority. And if you look across the street, when you come out here, there's a 16.5-acre site that GE left. It's part of the 52-acre William Stanley Business Park, which for 20 years was totally undevelopable because they demolished several large manufacturing buildings, but left 16.5 acres completely covered in concrete foundations and pavements. It was basically undevelopable for 20 years. So we raised over $10 million through various grants, and are in the middle of a redevelopment project right now. We're cracking and crushing, I think, over 26,000 tons of concrete, bringing in over 100,000 cubic yards of clean fill, greening it, putting in roadways and utilities, and getting it ready for development. So.
And before I turn it over to Michael, I want to say about Michael Coakley and the City of Pittsfield. So my startup, SolarBlock, has gone through the development process of working with the city and the state officials. And I think it just needs to be said, Rich and I have had experience, so we've known each other for years, other cities. The team here in Pittsfield punches way above their weight, and you guys should really be proud. Prior administrations, current administrations, city council really works hard to bring development to Pittsfield, and you guys are doing a great job. So
thank you. And that's the other part of my job. I'm the business development manager. I work to bring companies from outside the area into Pittsfield, like SolarBlock, and then also work with our local companies to help them expand.
Yeah. Literally, I'm not kidding, was it Monday, I was telling on my staff meeting, I haven't heard from Mike Coakley in a while, and during the staff meeting, I looked down, there's a phone call from Mike Coakley. So, Michael, you're up next.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Michael Lake. I'm the president, CEO, and founder of a nonprofit organization called Leading Cities. We're headquartered in Boston with global operations. Our mission as an organization is to drive sustainability and resiliency in communities around the world. And we do that through a number of different things, policy work, research, but we also run, and I think that's probably what's perhaps most apropos for today's discussion, we run the largest startup accelerator of its kind in the world that focuses on resiliency, sustainability, and that intersection with GovTech. So just to give you a sense, we're just onboarding this year's cohort. We started with 740 startups from 70 different countries. We've just onboarded 100 of them into our program, which includes a virtual innovation district. So I'm excited to talk about that virtual aspect of that as well. But thank you all for having me here, and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Michael. And Rich, over to you.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity for being here today. I'm Rich Overmoyer, CEO at Fourth Economy Consulting. Partly we named our company Fourth Economy because we see a better economic opportunity. That was about 10 years ago, and we're finally getting there, I think, in terms of what we're seeing in some of the clean and green activity that's happening. We kind of wear two hats. We are really a support for communities that are trying to reinvent themselves. So I met Eric back in another post-industrial city many years ago from Youngstown, and we were doing a lot of work in that community back in the day. So on one side of our team, we really think about the economic side of it, especially emerging sectors, so clean and green and blue economy in Massachusetts and on down into Rhode Island. And then on the other side, we think about quality of place, because it's great to try to start regaining our economic mojo, but if we don't have people, if we don't have population coming to our places, those things aren't going to balance out very well. And so we really work with communities to try to think about a vision for both of those things, to work together to really make better places and make the jobs that are going to make it interesting for people to want to come and create viable opportunities for them.
Thanks, Rich. And I got to say, obviously, Rich and I do go back quite some time. When I was working in Youngstown, Ohio in economic development in my hometown, I was part of the Cleveland-Pittsburgh Tech Belt Initiative. Fourth Economy staffed it, put together an incredible application, and we actually won President Obama's first public-private manufacturing accelerator, which is now called America Makes. And we beat out MIT, we beat out Caltech, I think Georgia Tech, partially because that organization was already put together and was organic, and really Rich's team was the one that made that happen. So kudos to all three of you for the work you're doing. I guess my first question is a bit of a leadoff, because I see a convergence, like a Venn diagram with all three of your missions, if you will, because it is about convergence of ideas and physical infrastructure. Mike really takes care of the physical side of things. Michael, you're taking care of kind of putting these virtual networks of information and communications together. And then Rich, you're also taking kind of traditional economic development models and marrying it with what is more about sustainability and what people actually want, what like, people are incentivized to live, exist, play, work in certain areas. So I guess I'm going to start with Michael in the middle. I'm going to call you Michael and Mike, if that's okay. Easy enough. Michael, tell me a little bit about an area like, if you see an area like Pittsfield, right, Western Mass, which is really a great comeback story. It's part of the Berkshires. The Berkshires has so much to offer because of people coming here and loving the sustainability aspect of the DNA of this area. You know, what lessons can we start learning about taking the Berkshires and taking this area to the next level in terms of how we develop what infrastructure we have right now?
Well, so I'd say the first thing, and I'm not speaking specifically of Pittsfield, but of any kind of comeback situation from any community, the first thing is kind of to shed that self-inflicted wound of the past, so to speak, and just keep that eye looking forward. The reality is, I mean, Pittsfield's a beautiful community. We were just talking about the development opportunities out here. The world is getting so small. I mean, I look at it through the lens of the virtual world, and therefore there is no distance. So I feel like part of the challenge with Pittsfield is still feeling like you're a remote community, when the reality is the world has come to you. Really being optimistic about what this community has to offer. I mean, there's the economics of it. Coming from Boston, you know, it's a lot cheaper out here for a business to do business. There's still tremendous talent out here. There's natural resources. All of these things are the assets you need to build any strong community. And when we're talking about innovation districts specifically, what is an innovation district really? It's about building a community, bringing together the resources, and it's really about that proximity, that concentration of these assets. But as I said before, it used to only be defined by physical proximity. But with the virtual world, Pittsfield is just as part of the world as any other place. Boston, San Francisco, you name it. So I think just kind of staking a claim to that, having the vision, that's probably the biggest thing. And knowing that it's going to take some big leaps and oftentimes leaps of faith to have a bigger picture, a longer term view. That vision is what will attract capital. From the federal government, you have amazing elected officials. I mean, Senator Mark is working in Beacon Hill, as you all know, to keep Western Mass on the radar screen so it doesn't get forgotten on Beacon Hill. But resources are coming here. But it's not just about the public capital. It's also about private capital. And you know, we have a saying at Leading Cities that, you know, there's plenty of capital out there. It's not about a lack of capital. It's about creating and structuring the deal properly, and the capital will come to you. And so I think this is really your job here, and you're doing a great job at it. And that's the real opportunity, I think, from leaders like Mike, to have that vision, to put that deal together and attract those resources and that capital to Western Mass and Pittsfield specifically.
I think it's a great point. And also, you know, it's funny about the perception issue. I think part of the way you get over your past sins, or, you know, the past economy and rejuvenate, is to actually see the physical changes. And so what Mike has been working on in Pittsfield is kind of interesting, because you always hear the phrase brownfield, this is brownfield property. You've actually converted brownfield property to greenfield property. So now how do you take that physical change and promote that, if you will, to the area, to investors and to stakeholders that come to the area? Like, how do you, what's the best way to do it, and where do you see as challenges?
Yeah, well, that's our next step. I mean, the project's going to go through October. It's looking much better now. Before, it was a moonscape out there, which people would, I'd take a company out there and they'd look at it and they'd start doing the moonwalk back away. Because it just, they couldn't imagine putting up a 50,000 or 100,000 square foot building, but then still be surrounded by acres and acres of concrete foundations. So now that it's being redeveloped and greened and being development ready, it's going to be a lot easier to, to bring companies here and to show them what we have and what's available. I think when we get our first development in there, it's going to, bring more and more development. We're talking to a developer now about doing a smaller project over on Site 9, but there'll be plenty of land available for other companies to come in. We've hired a commercial realtor to help widen the net to help bring other companies in. We advertise on LoopNet, which is one of the largest commercial real estate sites in the country, and we're just trying to get the word out there. And even things like this, to let people know that Pittsfield has the land, we have the innovation center, we have incentives. The state is really invested in helping us bring business here, so we're ready.
Yeah, exactly. So, Rich, now that we heard from Michael and Mike, I think your world has kind of overlapped with both of theirs, because you've dealt in both the physical, but also that societal change, if you will, that, the change in mindset. So kind of hearing from those two now, how do you think this area of the Berkshires should really tackle kind of the next issue, and Pittsfield should tackle that next issue, which is taking everything that's been done so far and going up slightly higher up the mountain?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we just met the other day, right, for the first time. I think there was such synergy in terms of how we think about this kind of activity, and certainly the vision part, I think, is the key piece of it. And it's hard to have that vision, when you see the brownfield, when you see the, the blighted properties and things like that. And so I think you're at that point between the shiny new center, right, and the cleared land here, that I think that's now you can start thinking about, okay, what's next and what is that vision? I think the tactical part of that is being honest about and authentic with what is the existing industry within the region. I kind of did some profiling as I was, preparing for this, and really looked at some of that, classic manufacturing, traditional manufacturing. I think there's a real opportunity to bring innovation even into the companies that you do have here. I didn't see a lot of sort of, investing in themselves, right? And I think that's a symptom if you don't have a vision, if you don't have confidence in your community. You don't see companies trying to upgrade themselves. So I think that's a real opportunity. I do think the other thing is thinking about, I worry a little bit when people start talking about innovation districts, because it's a term that is used relatively loosely these days. I think there is a classic, definition of it, but I think really need to think more broadly about sort of what is that sort of broader innovation economy that can be here in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation activity that can happen. And then, so what's the function more than the form, right? The form is going to be the real estate, and you've got that asset, it's ready to go, you're going to have brokers helping you, but what's also the form of what happens here, and what's the function of what happens here in terms of what's that programming so that companies can then connect? Because once you lure a company, is there the right, services, opportunities, network, the human capital side of it, and the social factor of that's going to keep them here. So things like soft landing sites and having a soft landing program or a base camp program are things that we work with a lot of communities to say, if once I land here, how do I make it really easy for me to start scaling once I get here, right? And so I think that's a piece that can be there. And then the last thing I'd say is, we love setting goals for communities and really thinking about, my favorite project was in the greater Fort Wayne region. We did a Road to 1 Million project. They wanted to get to 1 million people, which would have been about 250,000 more than they had over a 10 to 15 year period. It set a really audacious goal for that community to say, we can do this. We can actually invest in ourselves. We can fix the blight issues that we have, and we can start really building momentum around it. It was the first time I ever had a plan that we were in a baseball stadium. 3,000 people showed up for an economic development strategy. Free hot dogs, mind you, but and maybe a beer. I think we gave each person. So, but I think that's the thing, though. That really catalyzed all business owners in that community to say, wait, something is very different happening here right now. And so you have to really, publicize what is that goal that you're going to establish for yourselves in terms of, whether it's a head count of population or number of jobs you want to see get created. And then celebrate the heck out of success. Every time you do anything, celebrate, because it's going to keep building that confidence and the momentum that you need to have going forward. So hopefully there was a big party when this opened up, or when the switch was flipped, no matter how long that took or how painful. Hopefully those things are happening, that you're celebrating every one of those things and everything that I've been hearing about in the community.
We did do that. We had the governor here, and
Excellent.
about 2 days later, they shut down the state because of COVID.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
One of our largest employers here, is right down the road, is General Dynamics, and they would love to have, they work with hundreds of supplying companies, and most of them, 99%, are outside of the area. They would love to bring some of their companies here, and now that we have Site 9 almost available, it's a good time to work with General Dynamics to go after some of those companies and recruit them here as well.
Great. I was going to hold this till the end, but I think we should talk about it now, because as it wasn't a plan, I swear, in the first panel when I asked that question of Senator Mark, but I think there's a ton of excitement around the fact that the BIC was the leader and the catalyst in winning this DOE grant. This is an organization, an institution that didn't exist, 7 years ago, and now all of a sudden it's one of 7 spots selected by the DOE to build out supply chain for clean energy manufacturing. You can argue that President Biden's clean energy initiatives through IRA, Infrastructure Act, are one of the biggest policy initiatives in the last 50 years outside of anything related due to a financial crash or COVID. And the Berkshires is now one of the 7, and now there's a third round, if you will, to go for not just more money, but also that greater recognition and assistance. So, we're talking about everything being ready, everything ready to go, but I think now, I feel like the BIC has gotten halfway up the mountain, and now it's got to go up. And it's even a steeper climb. So what does this area do to really start getting itself ready to take some great initiative like clean energy manufacturing and put it in the context of everything great that's happening in the state of Massachusetts, and also the recognition from Boston that Western Mass is an essential part of the growth of clean tech manufacturing and supply chain? Like, what do you think the catalyst needs to be in order to get victorious in the third round of that grant application, but also just for the greater mission in general of making this a manufacturing hub for clean energy? I don't know.
There's a power generating company just down the road here. It was originally a GE power generation company. It's now called the Pittsfield Generating Company. There are 3 huge natural gas, what do you call them? The
Turbines?
Turbines. It's just a peaker plant at the moment. If we could come up with a company that could come in and change that to a clean energy company, it's a perfect spot for it. It would be a tremendous opportunity.
I mean, I think the idea of prototyping a new technology like small modular nuclear, Rich and I actually, tapped into that for a little bit 10 years ago, and now it's coming back all of a sudden. So I think, and that was always meant to replace peaker plants. And so there's something there to be said about that, for sure.
Yeah, I would also say, I think with the grant opportunity that you have with the award, right, I think it's that opportunity to take that next step to define, I think, some of those goals I was talking about in that vision for what could be here. I think you can utilize that, and I think build the base. I see lots of collaboration in the community, and this is my first day on the ground here, but I think, how do you continue to build that base of who's collaborating around those things? Because I think anytime you're getting, especially these smaller DOE or EPA grants these days, use it as an opportunity to think about what the whole portfolio should be. There are even bigger opportunities in that round 3. As we were walking in, I was like, if you looked at the, community change grants from EPA, which has an energy bent to it, can do a lot of things with environmental justice communities, which I looked at the map, which is all of Pittsfield is eligible for that. So I think thinking about that is not just sourcing to that one application, but build that coalition of people around it to say, these are the 5 things that we can go for next. So use it to leverage that activity.
Yeah, great. Michael?
I'll build on what's already been said. The DOE grant it's an opportunity to be leveraged, right? That alone is not going to solve any problem,
100%.
right? It has to be built on. But the recognition you get from that is a perfect way to attract some of the capital I was talking about earlier. So I agree with you. It comes right back to the vision, being specific, being, bold with that vision is important, because that's what's going to get other people excited to be part of it, including, I'll say, young people. Keeping young people here in the Pittsfield area is going to be a major cornerstone of that plan. even in Boston, every year, there's always the conversation around this time of year, May usually, about the brain drain, right? We hear it every year. The Boston Globe covers it. And it always frustrated me because the two reasons cited for the brain drain, at least in Boston, was climate and cost of living. So finally, when I started leading cities, one of the first research projects we did was to look into the brain drain. And I'm getting this, I know it was all about Boston. I'm going to make a point, I promise. But what we looked into, we basically were looking at those two, I'm going to now call them myths, of the reasons for why people were leaving Boston. And what we found in our research is that the three top locations of young people who left Boston, number one was New York City. So it's the same climate and a higher cost of living. Number two is San Francisco. I would argue a worse climate and a higher cost of living. And then the third was Washington, D.C., which at the time was an exact same cost of living. And okay, maybe you can argue slightly better climate, although I hate D.C. in the summer.
Yeah.
So I would again argue that it's not a good climate either. So what we obviously dug in, and what we found is that the reason young people were leaving is because they were pursuing a job. But the key to this was that they didn't have a job in any one of those three locations. They had the belief that there was a job there and didn't have a belief that it was here. So I've always said that the climate and cost of living is not the reasons of the people who have left. It's the complaints of all of us who have stayed. But you got a similar situation in Pittsfield, right? Like there's a challenge that has to be addressed of maintaining young people, maintaining that talent. You have it, it's here, but keeping it here is going to be the key thing. And it's both a difficult challenge and an easy challenge at the same time, because it's perception is the biggest thing. It's building on those celebrations to change that perception that there's nothing here for me, and get them instead to say, wow, look at the opportunity that the BIC brings. Look at the investment that the governor's office is making in the legislature. Look at what the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is doing out here in Western Massachusetts. Look at the opportunities we have to bring in new development, to bring in new capital, to create new jobs. And they're not just, any jobs. You have the opportunity to create high-tech, focus on the future jobs that are exciting to young people. So I think, I've probably gone off track here, but I think it is such a critical part of the overall strategy to maintain the young people and the talent. And I think that speaks to not just having a talent pool which will then attract businesses and keep businesses here, but it also talks to the community that you're building. I mean, you take a city like Austin, Texas, right? Not that long ago, Austin, Texas wasn't really on anybody's map, and now it's got one of the biggest, South by Southwest, one of the biggest conferences in the country. It's got a huge swell of excitement, and probably more so than anything is the culture that they've developed. Their tagline was "Keep Austin Weird," but what it did is it embraced itself.
Right.
And so that comes back to the point I wanted to say earlier about kind of shedding the past and embrace the present and the future that we have out here in Western Massachusetts.
I think we have the same challenge here. I mean, kids grow up here, go to high school, go off to college, and then leave for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I think, though, if we bring some innovative companies and innovative jobs back, it's going to make it a lot easier to bring kids back here.
That's right.
to live and work. It's a
Well-
great place to live and work. I see Andrew out there. I haven't seen you since you graduated from high school. It's great to have you back.
You can't leave now.
Andrew, you'll be doing a testimonial on the website in a few minutes. It's funny because you talk about that, and my hometown of Youngstown was the prototypical brain drain place. I mean, so many jobs are lost. But at the same time, one of the incubators that started there, they did a diaspora analysis. They found out, where is everybody? Where did everyone go? And then he reached out to those people and they said, do you have a business yourself? Or are you part of a business that'd be interested in relocating? And they actually reached out to people, and there was such heartfelt compassion for people trying to help an old Rust Belt city that it actually had an impact. People were actually bringing, subsidiaries of their businesses or satellite operations in, not, en masse, but enough to get the momentum going. And I always thought that was a great strategy. And I want to go to Rich next because he and I have talked about this over the years and saw it in practice. One interesting thing about Pittsfield is if you're, working out in the morning and you got the morning news on, it's actually the Albany News, and they're talking about Pittsfield schools, et cetera. We're part of the Albany media market here in some ways. There's a border that some people, especially in governments, let's face it, state governments, thinks it's a lot more of a solid wall than it actually is. As I like to tell people in Mass and New York, the carbon in the atmosphere doesn't stop at the state border one way or the other. So how do we get?
By the way, neither does the talent.
There is a town, exactly right. I see an improvement even in my 2 years of being here from both state of Mass and state of New York officials recognizing that this is an invisible border. And you have Vermont just north of here as well. How do we actually formalize that process so we can maybe get a little bit more cooperation and collaboration? I personally think this phase 3 application for the DOE is going to be a big part of this because we got to think uniquely and creatively. What else can we be doing? And Rich, just want to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
here.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, that was a long time ago. We led that project. But I think the point about, that vision part, I think, that vision doesn't have to be confined to just, this community. I think it can be a regional vision. And again, thinking about sort of what's that asset base, what's happening broadly in the region, what are the needs, what are the things that people want to see in their community. We keep saying like the whole live, work, play, which is an overused thing in economic development space. The play part of that is a region usually. It's not the city. It doesn't care about it, and even the commuter flow is somewhat tighter. The recreation shed, as I'm trying to coin it these days, is much broader. So I think that's where you can get into a region and think about like, what's our shared vision for what we want to be? I think, sometimes it's hard, right? The politics. We're currently involved in one of the tech hubs. It's the Ocean Tech Hub between Southeast Massachusetts and the state of Rhode Island. And it's interesting. It's really the first step is a trust building exercise. I think being honest with everybody about what are our aspirations, what are the limitations, what we have either as a community or in this case, both of the state governments have a very different array of programs. You got to do that good work of matching up what does that look like,
right.
And how do we maybe leverage some ideas and like guilt our state into doing something that maybe they're not already, so that we can start having similar programs for the entrepreneurs. But then also thinking about that, putting yourself in the shoes of a business to say, every door that they go through should be the right door. You shouldn't just say, well, we don't have that in Mass. Sorry, right? Now we're saying, well, you don't have that in Mass, go to Rhode Island, they have it, and vice versa, right? So we're able to have those conversations. I think you'll see that certainly between New York and Massachusetts, two very strong states in terms of what they're doing in clean energy, but they're different programs, right? And so is there an opportunity to leverage that, not getting yourselves into trouble politically? I think as long as we do it eyes wide open in terms of what's there and brief our elected leaders that this is okay. It's okay to have these kind of
Right.
conversations. And especially now, I think the federal opportunity, and you'll see, all the tech hubs around the country and all the CHIPS Act, they're all collaborating right now. And I think that's a huge opportunity because we've also just been working in Syracuse with the Micron, the semiconductor, the first green chips program. So they're working with Boise people, and they're bringing people back and forth to Boise, and now they're going into Columbus and working with Intel, even though it's Micron. So I think we're seeing a level of collaboration I've never seen before. So we were pioneers, I think, back in the day in terms of some of this work, but it really was getting all those stakeholders to understand, like, okay, we're actually not competing, we're more at that time, we're competing with Denver, with Austin probably. And so, like, to understand that we have, if we leverage all of our assets together, we can compete at scale with them. And so I think just figuring that out.
I mean, we actually got Browns and Steelers fans in the same room to actually talk to each other. That's pretty fascinating. So let's do this, because I'm going to do the same question for all three of you, and then we'll take some Q&A before we convert over. But let's talk about 5 years from now. Let's say we're in the same room, all of us are together 5 years from now, and we're ready to pop the bubbly because we've had some great successes. What do those successes look like, and what do you think the key factor to get from here to that celebration 5 years would look like? What do we need to do? And I'll turn it over to Mike first.
I think for me, it'd be wonderful to have several innovative companies right here at the William Stanley Business Park and throughout the city of Pittsfield, and bring a lot of kids back, who left the area and have them come back to live and work here as well. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Michael?
So I'm going to go even bigger, Michael.
Okay. I like it.
I think Pittsfield could be a clean tech capital here in the United States, in the Northeast especially, and that will bring people back. I think there's everything here you need, and that's part of, one thing I meant to say earlier, is that probably one of the first steps is doing kind of an asset inventory. And that also helps to shed that past. Let's start focusing on what you have here and celebrating what you have here and focusing that on the future. So I think that would be one of the critical steps. And then the other thing is, we've said it several times, but it's that vision. Dare to be bold and reach forward, because that's what actually builds the momentum. That's what gets people on board. That's what's going to create the wave of momentum that is necessary to attract the capital, to keep the young people, and attracts companies here. And, as often said, but when you look at what's happening from the White House, you look at what's happening at the DOE, you look at what's happening here at the State House with the Mass Clean Energy Center, the governor's announcement, an investment in climate tech. I mean, all of this, leads to the question, if not now, when? And if not here, where?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would start with a goal, right? Let's say 4% growth year over year. Figure out what that number is. I didn't look closely at the population. But so let's say 4% per year over a 10-year stretch, right? So, and then I think to get there though, right, I think as I kind of drove around and did sort of a windshield tour, I think thinking about a couple of different things. I do think activating the social capital side of things with some downtown redevelopment creates some energy down there. I couldn't feel it today. Maybe it's hot, I don't know. But I think that's a part of it. Like if you're going to attract younger people, I think having some social spot where there is that sort of serendipity can happen. And then, yeah, I think building out of this space, I think you have a prime opportunity to use this as that catalyst to bring in companies from outside and bring other larger companies to set up base camp shops and things like that. But I think the one thing I saw in a quick research was around the art and culture investments that have been made here. I think that is a critical piece. Link this in with this conversation. I don't know if they already are, but make sure that's the key part. And then the outdoor recreation. I mean, that's a no-brainer, but we see communities around the country growing by leaps and bounds just because they're building trails, they're putting in, facilities for people that, in the grand scheme of things are low cost, but that's what the next generation wants. And then the last thing is, I think we're also seeing a lot of people moving to places where climate is 60% of millennials look at what the climate impact of the company that they're going to go work for, right? So the more that you can embrace that holistically, that's going to be key for that next generation to want to come and live here. And so every company needs to drink whatever Kool-Aid we've been drinking and make sure that they're on board with that.
Yeah, I love that last point because I'm actually doing a fellowship right now on ESG reporting. And, there's a lot of greenwashing still out there about companies. And the greenwashing has a double-edged effect, in my opinion, because some of it actually leads to their competitors actually doing more tangibly to actually say this isn't greenwashing, these are tangible impacts. But there's still a lot out there that's questionable. So the more we could define by the community that the companies are stewards for sustainability, I think it will lead to better attraction of talent. So why don't we have a few minutes, so I'd love to get some questions going.
Great job, guys. Garth Klimchuk, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing from me. But I've been in the Berkshires for 35 years now. And we have all the elements to make this county the best in the country. I would argue that the one element that's missing is a formal, detailed marketing strategy, which means you go hire a marketing firm, you bring it all together, and you tell that firm to take it to the market. Austin, and I'll give you another city, Asheville, North Carolina, they have a marketing strategy because Asheville is marketing to major sports events. You see Asheville, North Carolina, all of a sudden, well, where's that? And they show up and they say, this is a wonderful city to be in. This county, and Michael, I'm gonna ask you, does PETA and City of Pittsfield have a formal marketing strategy to bring everything you've said together and go?
I would say we don't have that at this point, but I think that's a great idea.
I mean, all we need to do is go down to New York, go to Boston, find the best marketing firms from a municipal perspective. We've got to pay them money, obviously, but get them engaged and say, here's what you have. You have everything you need. It's low-hanging fruit. Go Go get it.
I think we got a couple on this table, quite honestly.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is it's also probably not just external, also internal. We see a lot of times communities do that. They're trying to recruit in. They haven't also sold the message to their own community about where this confidence is. You guys have all are seeing it, right? Not everybody is, and that you need to get them to be on that bandwagon, that progress is happening and that they can be part of it.
Great. A couple over here.
Thanks. So I'll just respond to what you said a little bit, Garth, and ask a question of you guys really quick. So One Berkshire, many of you might know One Berkshire, has a plan and is doing what you just described, Garth, to the best of its ability with the resources that it has. It's a One Berkshire member, or excuse me, a BIC member, supporting member of BIC. So One Berkshire is essentially the Berkshire Chamber of Commerce, the Berkshire Economic Development Council, and the Berkshire Visitors Bureau combined into one agency. And they market the Berkshires. But they have limited funds. New York State provides funding for tourism marketing to the tune of $10 million a year for its regional, tourism boards. We have to fight here in the Berkshires for $50,000, $100,000 a year. And so it's members of One Berkshire that largely fund that. So you mentioned money. How do you pay a big marketing firm in Boston or New York to market the Berkshires? You got to have money to do it. So, One Berkshire is doing its best to do that, and I think has done a great job in coming up with a plan and trying to implement it with what resources it has. But a huge impediment that was discovered in their studies that they've had done to discover what the Berkshires has that people want and why would they come here to start a business, to move here, to work here, so forth. The huge impediment right now is housing. So my question to you guys is, how do we overcome that? If you want companies to come here to try to then, innovative companies, to then attract young people to come back here, they have to have a place to live, and they don't right now. So, you have to, one thing has to happen before the other, I guess. Or maybe it all happens together. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Housing is definitely an issue. I mean, it's an issue throughout the state, throughout the city, through the Berkshires. I know Governor Healy is very invested in that. There's plenty of money going into housing. We have some local companies here who are looking to put up some housing. General Dynamics, one of their biggest challenges in recruiting people is to find appropriate housing for them. So the state and the city they're definitely working on that at this point. So hopefully things will get better.
I will say that this is some good news and bad, but the reality is housing almost everywhere is an issue. So in that sense, they got nowhere else to live either. So I'm joking a little bit, but the truth is it is a real issue. I mean, nationwide, there are pockets, of course, where there's less of an issue of housing, but and the housing issues vary as well. Like sometimes it's it's the housing stock is just not up to par. Other places it's the affordability piece. So there's different housing issues. I would say that at least my take on a place like the Berkshires, you have almost the extremes, right? Depending on which pocket you're looking at. So in my opinion, when you have both extremes, it's actually easier to get to the middle. It's when you have one or the other that's actually more difficult. So I'd say out in this part of Massachusetts, you're actually probably better poised than a lot of places around the country to tackle that housing, given the fact that it's not easy. But there are new technologies that are helping with the speed of building houses, the type of housing, the efficiency of the housing, the materials being used, the cost of that. Although, of course, the pandemic threw everything out of whack in terms of cost. But I do think that there's enough focus on housing that it's at least being considered and dealt with as best we can at the moment. And in the not too distant future, I think some of these opportunities will be unlocked and we'll see better options for people.
Rich? Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, the only thing I would just touch on two things. One is, I think we're seeing a lot of because everybody's struggling with this, there's a lot of experimentation and different table setting happening, which is, I think, pretty interesting because, yeah, we need, the way that we've done housing from the time you think about building it in a place to the time somebody, turns the key in the door, it's broken, right? That's part of the problem, and so we need to change it. So it's gonna take a lot of different stakeholders to sit around a table to figure that out. I think the innovation side is what excites me. I think there's a lot of modular housing that really gets into the sustainability factor, clean energy side of it. I don't think many of those are doing as much solar as they probably should be right now when we're seeing. I can tell you in the Midwest, we have a lot of clients, and even Pittsburgh, one of the rock stars is a company called Module that's in this space. They're beautiful. It's not like, some people when you say modular housing, they're like, like they think of these weird, ugly boxes. It's not that, right? So I encourage you to look at that. So like, there are things like that you can create innovation and create new production plants that bring manufacturing jobs and solve your housing issue at the same time. There's a number of communities racing to get there right now.
Yeah, and I would add to your I think the first panel discussion kind of answered this question in such a great way because think about Governor Healy, the fact that took this Green Bank monies and said, we're actually going to take it away from Mass CEC, who's a great organization, and we're going to put it in housing because we can kill two birds with one stone in such a positive way. And Senator Mark, who's here, who represents the Berkshire and is a catalyst for the Green Bank, signed off on that. I think the Berkshires could be a step ahead of other parts, even within Massachusetts, because they're in a position to take advantage of that green housing, Green Bank legislation, and those monies, and to put it and deploy it into housing. That's a totally shameless plug for my company, Solar Block, because we want to be a part of that.
There are 3 buildings in downtown Pittsburgh right now on North Street that are either being converted into housing or being redeveloped into housing. Everything from market rate to affordable housing. One of the buildings was an office building. It was one of Berkshire Bank's buildings that's going to be converted into housing. So we're working on it. The Polish Club is going to be housing as well, yeah.
Yeah, and look, in my hometown of Youngstown, downtown was dead. I mean, absolutely dead. And there's like 7 buildings now that were converted to housing. And they had the benefit of having Youngstown State University right next door to it. So some of that's student housing, but it created a renaissance downtown. And like downtown is buzzing now. So it's great. I was going to ask about downtown in housing. And so that's a great catalyst. Other questions really quick? Yeah, I think you had.
I think I have 2 minutes. So I'm Mark Rudolph, and I'm also a Berkshire County resident. I actually live here in Pittsfield and relocated here from the New York area less than 2 years ago. So this will give you a little bit of a perspective. There was just some things, if you can just comment on, not really questions, with regard to just getting people here. One is medical care. I know the hospital has been, really like actively looking to recruit physicians here. My wife and I were both physicians, but I don't practice. She practices dermatology. I think she is by far the youngest dermatologist here, and she's a little older than I am. So I maybe comment on that. Another is just transportation. Like I'm in biotech, going back and forth to Boston, and there is no way with public transportation to get to and from Boston in the same day. And I don't know if I've mentioned that to a couple of people, and they say, "Oh yeah, that's been, that discussion's been going on for a long time." And then one other thing is just education. We've been talking about keeping the kids here, and I don't have enough time to go into it right now. But a colleague of mine, we have a program to actually expose middle school kids to high-tech companies. I'd like to talk to some of you about that, afterwards, as well as working with high school seniors and community college students to get them the skills that they need to go into these companies. Because, if there's one thing we've learned over the past year or so is that you don't really need a bachelor's degree, to do a lot of these jobs that are really key for companies that are going to be here. So maybe you can just comment on some of these things. It'd be great.
I just want to say something about the brain drain piece. Coming back to the research we did in Boston, it's the same thing here. I'm glad you mentioned engaging young people, while they're students. This was one of the things, one of our recommendations of that report was as students, you have a captive audience. And the way most communities treat students is as if they're like some second-class citizen or some other group, and then suddenly they walk across that stage, somebody hands them a piece of paper, and they're like, "Oh no, we want you to stay." Yeah, why would you leave this community? But we've ignored you for 4 years or 8 years or 12 years or whatever. So that act of engaging students while they are students, and whether it's internships or cooperative education models, integrating them into that business community, call it, is a way to set an anchor. Because one thing you cannot pack up and take with you to New York, San Francisco, DC, or wherever is your network, right? So that's probably one of the biggest anchors to a community, and there's a great opportunity to engage at young ages.
I don't know if you've spoken with Ben Sossi from the BIC yet, but the BIC is doing a lot of that program right now, exposing kids to the companies here in Pittsfield and in the Berkshires. They have the Manufacturing Academy, but I would recommend you talk to Ben about your company. It's too bad Senator Mark has left, because I know he's been working on the transportation here for a long time.
You're all good? So, it's funny. I want to say, first off, thanks to our panelists, and especially Michael and Rich, who came in from Boston and Rhode Island just for this panel discussion. I think let's give a round of applause to everybody. Thank you. And before we close up, it was funny. I was ready to acknowledge Steve Boyd, who's chairman of the BIC, and really who had the vision to put this together. I think he had to step out himself. But the BIC staff and the BIC board of directors, they put their heart and soul into using this as the forum and catalyst to grow, along with the city of Pittsfield and other actors in this area. So, I think you should really appreciate what they have done, and we're all going to take it to the next level together. So thank you all for being here, and appreciate your time. Take care.
Michael?